Hello everyone, let us take up another lecture of MOOC Swayam, Nationalism and Constitutional Growth in India 1858 to 1920. I am Parvez Alam from Department of Political Science, Aligarh Muslim University. Today we'll be dealing with that what we call it Minto reforms or Indian Councils Act 1909. Now, in the background, if we see that despite Queen Victoria's proclamation that Indians would be treated equally, very few Indians got such an opportunity as the British authorities were hesitant to accept them as equal partners. Lord Curzon had carried out the partition of Bengal in 1905. This led to a massive uprising in Bengal as a result, which we were discussing in the last lecture. Following this, the British authorities understood the need for some reforms in the governance of Indians. The Indian National Congress was also agitating for more reforms and self-governance of Indians. The earlier Congress leaders were moderates, but now extremist leaders were on the rise who believed in more aggressive methods. Indian National Congress demanded home rule for the first time in 1906. Gopal Krishna Gokhale met Morley in England to emphasize the need for reforms. Especially Shimla deputation. If you see, there's a group of elite Muslims led by Aga Khan met Lord Minto in 1906 and placed their demand for a separate electorate for the Muslims. Which in a way, John Morley, who was a member of the Liberal government, and he wanted to make positive changes in India's governance. So let us see, that especially the very key acts, or the key features of the act. This Indian Council Act of 1909 was also known as the Morley-Minto reforms. Marked a significant step in broadening political anticipation in British India. This Morley-Minto reforms named after John Morley, who was the Secretary of State for India, and Lord Minto, who was the Viceroy. The Act introduced limited elections to legislative councils and aimed to appease moderate voices within the Indian National Congress. However, the introduction of separate electorates for Muslims had divisive consequences. What were the rising demands and and also how loyalties were divided? If you see, there was growing call for reforms from moderates in the Indian National Congress. Demand for separate electorates for Muslims by the Muslim League. And this British, in fact, desired to appease loyal segments of the Indian population and counter nationalist unrest. So the early 20th century saw increasing momentum for greater Indian participation in governance. The moderate faction, which we have been seeing, from Indian Council Act as well, the Thau Gopal Krishna Gokhale, Firoz Shah Mehta, and others were basically doing all sort of propaganda within the legislative council. How the very kind of relaxation on the restrictions were allowed in 1892 Council Act. But the moderate faction within the Indian National Congress, led by figures like Surendranath Banerjee, advocated for constitutional reforms within the British framework. Meanwhile, the newly formed Muslim League under the leadership of the Aga Khan sought separate electorates for Muslims, fearing marginalization in united electorate. And the Britishers saw these developments as opportunities to divide and weaken the nationalist movement. Now, what were the key features of the Act? If we see, the Legislative Council was expanded. So, Central Council, which had a 16-member Central Council, that got expanded to 60 members. Provincial councils saw also variable increases. There was the process of indirect election. Local bodies formed electoral colleges to elect provincial legislators, who then elected central legislators. Also, it enhanced deliberative powers, like councils could ask questions or discuss budgets and propose resolutions. There was also introduction of Indian members to Executive Council, which is the highest council, not legislative council we are talking about, not provincial councils we are talking about. We are talking about Executive Council, which is the council of the Viceroy. And in that council, the Indian member, the first Indian member, called Satyendra Prasad Sinha, was in fact invited to become the member of the Executive Council, who was in fact the very first Indian. And this act also introduced separate electorates for Muslims. So Muslims elected by Muslim voters, that marked a shift towards communal representation. So the act introduced several changes to the structure and function of legislative council. The size of council was significantly increased, offering more opportunities for Indian representation. However, the system of indirect elections limited popular participation. Councils gained greater deliberative powers, but real decision-making authority remained with the British. The inclusion of Indians, in Executive Council was a symbolic gesture, as the influence was restricted. The most significant and controversial aspect was the introduction of separate electorates for Muslims, which sowed the seeds of future of religious divisions. Now, if we move further to see that how Indian Councils Act or Morley-Minto reforms was received, and what were the implications, it was not really received well by the, either of the side. There was mixed reactions. Moderates within the Congress saw it as a step forward, while radicals like Gandhi criticized it as inadequate. Also, it was a rise of Muslim political identity. The Muslim League gained prominence as the sole representative of Muslims. But this act, in a way, because of the separate electorate, sowed the seeds of communalism, which in a way fueled religious divisions and contributed to the later partition of India. If we see that this is the act generated diverse responses, moderates within the Congress like Gokhale and Banerjee viewed it as a positive step, albeit limited. However, radical nationalists like Gandhi criticized inadequacy and continued to demand for self-rule. The Muslim League, with its executive focus on Muslim interests, its influence rise, the introduction of separate electorate had far-reaching consequences. It solidified religious identities, in the political sphere, ultimately contributing to the tragic partition of India in 1947. Now, what was the significance of the Morley-Minto reforms? If we see that Morley-Minto reforms was marked, the first introduction of elections in British India, albeit limited, increased Indian representation in legislative councils. This opened the door for further constitutional reforms in the future. This highlighted the complexities of religious and political identities in colonial India. Despite its limitations, the Morley-Minto reforms hold historical significance. They mark the first instance of elections in British India, even if indirect. While the Act's provisions were restricted, it paved the way for further constitutional reforms in the decades to come. The inclusion of Indians in Executive Council indicated a shift in perspective. Satyendra P. Sinha's entry in Executive Council was seen as a compromising attitude of the British, especially Morley Minto reforms was the first step forward. Now, of course, it was a limited reforms if we evaluate the Indian Council Act of 1909. There was no answer to nationalist demand for self-government. It introduced indirect elections and representation from 16 to 60. It, of course, expanded, but it was not really for self-government because Executive Council had the power, which was like unlimited kind of power. Separate electorates, aimed at dividing Hindus and Muslims. The very collaborative kind of Indian national movement which was going on, where Hindus and Muslims, leaving aside their religiosity, were kind of, aiming to achieve the goal of liberation. But in a way, the very kind of, separatist tendencies were kind of, I mean, helped to some extent by the British, to the Muslims that, there's only panacea of the Muslim problem is to have a separate, electorates. And this in a way was also kind of appeasement policy of a small Muslim elite, and in fact not the entire community, because not entire Muslim community in fact supported the very idea of separate electorate. It was the small Muslim elite which wanted this separate electorate to function, where that will provide certain kind of greater representation of Muslims in the legislative council, as well as also, of course, provincial council, as separate electorate in a way would also mark the constituencies which will be like Muslim majority constituencies where Muslims will be voting to the Muslim candidate. Also, if we evaluate, there was this process of indirect election system. In fact, this system hindered participation and transparency. Because of the limited power granted to councils, Indian National Congress and the other leaders started leading and writing, because of their frustration and criticism. If we see in 1909, the British government, while introduced the Indian Council Act, aiming to pacify moderate nationalists and quell growing demands for self-government, this this particular act in a way had a lasting impact on India's political landscape. The act, of course, failed to address the core concern of self-governance. The very idea of separate electorate intended to sow discord, which backfired and fueled communal tensions. While elections were introduced and power remained firmly in British hands, leading to disillusionment among nationalists. Now, let us see what were the positive aspects of the reform. If you see, as I have been saying and I am saying, that it was the first ever elections for Indians to legislate, Indians to legislative councils. It was, the introduction of the electoral principle laying the groundwork for future democracy. Also, because of the increased avenues for voicing grievances and critiquing the administration, the act made a significant step, also by introducing elections and the electoral principle. And this provided a foundation for future democratic reforms and a platform for Indians to express their concerns. Um, if we see that what were the unintended consequences, uh, maybe British Raj was using this tactic of divide and rule, and they in fact succeeded. Again because of the unawareness of the British tactics, and hence Indian National Congress leaders or Muslim League leaders, they got into the trap of this particular act, and also there was a limited impact on achieving self government. This act was seen as benevolent despotism rather than true reform. Um, the act's attempt to divide Hindus and Muslims had lasting ramifications, contributing to the eventual partition of India. It failed to deliver on self-government aspirations, leaving nationalist sentiment simmering. Ultimately, the reforms were perceived as a token gesture rather than genuine, progress. Lastly, if we see that what is the legacy of the act, this act paved the way for future democratic reforms, highlighted limitations of colonial rule and fueled nationalist movement. Also, there was communal division created by the act. Because of this division, on communal lines created by the act, had a kind of lasting consequence, which is going to stay this issue of communal division and communalism for almost say a century rather. Uh, you know, the act marked a turning point in India's political journey. While its immediate impact was limited, it exposed the flaws of colonial rule and fueled the nationalist movement. However, the communal divide it created had tragic consequences, casting a long shadow on India's future. I stop here, and in the next lecture, we will be talking about formation of All India Muslim League, and we'll see that how All India Muslim League's activity culminated, and I will also deal with some of the other topics like home rule, as well as other kind of events which are unfolded post 2010. So I stop here, and we will have discussion in the next lecture. Thank you.